a huge role, like institutions like Paratech play a huge role in um, creating structures of feeling and thoughts which are akin to incel-hood. So, what do you guys know about incel? Do you use it? Are you aware of it? Is it part of your everyday vocabulary? And what would be a typical usage? Is it used like a kind of term of abuse? Is it derogatory? What is it? So I mean, like someone like Sandeep Reddy Banga,
Yeah.
you could call.
Yes,
I
yes.
think some meaning of it like hostility to partner.
Yeah. So hostility towards your partner, or even the withdrawal from like a sexual or a romantic engagement in some ways, because you think that you are being rejected, you're unattractive, or for whatever reasons, there is kind of withdrawal from this idea of a romantic engagement in some ways. And so, of course, we know about the famous Sandeep Reddy's Ranga, and his films. They can be termed as incel because the male protagonists, they show a high degree of aggressivity, and they are like what according to him, like I'm just going to read the famous quote from Vanga.
This meeting is being
Where he says, yeah, if you can't slap, touch your woman wherever you want, can't kiss, can't use cuss words, I can see emotion there. So in some ways there is kind of justification for violence that he is projecting. It's not like withdrawing from the, in fact, it kind of complicates our notion of what an incel is. If I'm defining incel as something which is a withdrawal from the sexual act or from the homosexual, from sexuality or from whether it's heterosexual or otherwise, then here it's not, the quote does not necessarily kind of express that aversion. It's just saying that one should be able to do whatever one wants to. And so that also expresses a certain kind of like hostility, as you said, or nihilism towards the romantic aspects of what we consider love. So in some ways, like love is then not this meeting of soulmates. It can't be seen then as this kind of perfect union, where each partner hears the other even without words being spoken out. But in some ways, there's a kind of violation of both sides. At least Vanga would try to emphasize that, because he's not necessarily, because to his critics, he would say that the woman also has a right to violence. Both partners, he would say, have a right to violence. So in a way, he is formulating a new definition of what's permissible within the couple relation. So I'll just leave it there. But the thing that I want to what is usually I go all over the place, so I have to stick to the time, and so I'm going to stay with the PowerPoint slides. But yeah, the reason what do I want to communicate today? What are the stakes of my talk? And so, what I really want to say is that what has happened with the notion of incel and is that it has it's very similar to the signifier toxic masculinity, another term which is used very frequently these days. and to again refer to this kind of aggressivity within men. And so, like, what one is observing as a result of that is that there is a kind of sense in which masculinity itself is being stigmatized. Like earlier, masculinity would stand for pride, loyalty, courage, honor, all the things which kind of gave it a positive spin. And in the last few decades, with the kind of emergence of vocabulary like toxic masculinity in itself, what we are seeing is not the emergence of a new figure, but masculinity itself is being defined as a function of toxicity. So in some ways, it's like demeaning masculinity itself. So it's like this is a little bit counterintuitive because it's my talk is not just going to be about pathologizing the horrible male figure. So nor am I trying to rescue Sandeep Reddy-Manga. I'm not trying to rehabilitate him and say like there is something which needs to be preserved about these kind of toxic males. But I'm trying to like see what is really going on with this category of toxicity and incel. And so, I would like all of you to be open to that, to that understanding of what is fact in these terms. And because nobody wants, like, do we want to live in a world where masculinity itself has been voided? Like, if it only stands for toxicity, if there is no other definition of masculinity permissible, then does that mean that that we want the so-called masculine to turn themselves, surrender themselves to the feminine position? There's nothing wrong with that, and that's one way of looking at it. That the masculine should now cease to exist, and they should become feminine, because that is a more progressive or radical way to be, more human way to be. And so I'm starting with this premise that is the term incel or toxic masculinity just something which is which characterizes a special kind of male, or is it something which is in continuum with the whole category of masculinity itself? So, are you with me so far? Okay. So I just wanted to those are the kind of that is the stage in my talk. So. Yeah, so in the first slide, like what we have is, so I'm going to again start with a different view which looks at these formulations as doing something which can be destructive. So in this thing, I listened to two scholars, Danny Nobles and Robert Ballard, who are part of the psychoanalytic tradition, and they say that aggressivity need not be coincidental or synonymous with abuse or exploitation. So this is the point that is missed out when we give this kind of blank attribute, this blank um, kind of leave this blank allegation of masculinity itself being toxic. So what is really kind of involved with that? So for example, what they are saying is that aggressivity in our society and civilization has a use value. Whereas increasingly, aggressivity has been seen as synonymous with or leading to, like, naturally, automatically leading to forms of violence, forms of oppression, as they happen in Bangla film. So in the Bangla film, we do see that it's not just aggressivity. Because let me kind of ask you guys, like when I teach in Hawaii especially, when I ask my students about, whenever they encounter a character who's very angry, they feel very uncomfortable, especially the women. They feel very uncomfortable with the character, especially if it's a feminine character. If it's a female character who's being confrontational, who's being aggressive, they feel very uncomfortable. So I don't know if this is a global thing, but and when I ask them like why are you feeling uncomfortable, they say that the same thing would be said in a more civil way, more less aggressive ways. So I feel there's a hostility towards the aggressive character, both male and female. And do you share such a feeling?
The opposite. Yeah.
Is Aman alone in his appreciation of the angry woman in literature, cinema?
I think it's more about the feminine rage, which is
Exactly, this is suppressed for you.
yeah, feminine rage is not uncomfortable, but when a man is like really violent or aggressive.
So, how would you, can a man not have
Yeah, I mean,
partake of rage or
it's
anger?
not-
I
it's
find
not-
that feminine rage mostly seems like defensive rather than offensive, as opposed to the masculine rage, which initiates.
There's a perpetuality to the kind of violence and the kind of rage, aggression that the masculine character is, showcased, especially in Bollywood, for that matter. Whereas the kind of feminine rage that comes forward, it's not perpetual. I mean, that's another thing that is very problematic. But it's not perpetual. It's more like it comes on instances where it's just pent up anger rather than just nonchalant aggression.
I think that feminine rage is seen as performative or and masculine rage in that sense is seen as the polar dichotomy of that as destructive and enervating. So therefore there is reading of rage that happens in the social cultural spectrum.
But even in Indian like cosmology or mythology, even feminine like Durga Kali is destructive, right? She can be very annihilating. But I think the reason why they are talking about not collapsing aggressivity with actual violence is something that one has to pause. And of course, thanks to the media and to images such as in these films, we have, and also maybe around us, we see more and more images of masculine men, aggressivity spilling over into acts of violence. So I can understand where you're coming from, but is that necessarily so? And are we not then risking the demonization of aggressivity itself? Like kind of, I don't want to say righteous anger because it need not be righteous. Like people have a right to aggression, right? Because the world is not a nice place, and there are so many frustrations. Like just talking about Valentine's Day, you're supposed to be X, Y, and Z, and naturally it's not nice, and so you can be frustrated. And this imperative to not show your, not vent, not show your frustrations is something which leads to what in kind of common psychoanalysis is known as depression. And again, depression or bottling down of feelings is, like then it starts the whole circle of, that's like you said, pent up violence or pent up. So, I mean, I guess more you would agree that both masculine and feminine positions are equally capable of feeling that kind of pent up rage, right? It's not the prerogative of one or the other. But yes, because of the social asymmetry, the gender asymmetry, one can see how a woman's rage can be more seen as more righteous than that of a man. But let's stick with that. And the next slide, please. So when we actually look at instances of toxic masculinity in cinema, and like I think we need to define that, like like one way of defining it is that it's spilling over into direct action, into gun violence, into murder, into sexual violence, and then like there is an impulse to censor it, right? Like our first impulse is to say that this should not be shown, or that our children should not watch it. Do you feel that is true, or am I making things up?
I mean, I'm just confused here because are we talking about anger or are we talking about aggression? Because for me personally, I think aggression is something that is inflicted rather than felt. So, I mean, if you're talking about censoring a particular scene or a particular, something that is shown, any kind of violence, for me, that is inflicted aggression rather than anger.
No, I'm talking about, like, let's say what you are saying, like it's a form of violence, it's an act of, like it's something which translates into an action and a form of violence. And so, should that be, like, what is our audience response to that image? Is it to censor it? Should we show it or should we not? Because that is also the question, right? Because some would argue that one should show the unpleasant aspects of life. Why? Because like Susan Sontag herself, like the high priestess of cultural theory, she would say that traumatic images that can scorch us, they have a use value, which is that they want us, and which means that they do not allow us to forget it easily. The implication being that if we do not forget, then we will not repeat. Right? Like, after Auschwitz, never again. That kind of thing. But we know that, Auschwitz has maybe not been forgotten thanks to the Holocaust industry, and yet, right now there is a Holocaust going on. And so that's the dilemma, that does the image serve to act as a cautionary warning, as a kind of deterrent, or is it just feeding into the libidinal cycle of, like making it viral, keeping the thing going, circulating it? So the impulse to censor then arises with the latter tendency, like when you see that it's not helping at all. Like for example, in the films of Ganga, that 900 crores or whatever amount. Like, so we know that it's people are not just watching it because never again. They're watching it because they're getting some thrill, some sexual kind of enjoyment. And and that's why the feminists or large part of the audience are also so critical of the film, because they suss out that there's something which is problematic here. Because it feeds into this kind of celebratory violence, like as mentioned in that quote, like justification for that figure to circle. And so now he's making Animal Park, he's making Animal 2 and stuff like that. So it becomes like a franchise. And this is not just peculiar to it's peculiar to capitalist industry, cultural industry itself. That's how it works. So it's not nothing that there's something exceptional going on. So in some ways, like point I'm making is slightly subtle and delicate. What I'm saying is that, so alright, it's very easy to pull up Mr. Bangla, and say that these are his crimes. He's celebrating this kind of a figure, he's justifying violence, and he is, in fact, embracing the figure of the toxic masculine on himself, because he's showing that such a figure is, within such a figure, the one leads to the other. Any sign of aggressivity, like we know that the figure, protagonist in the film is, he was frustrated by his. How many of you watched the film?
Could not sit through the entire film.
Very few. Okay.
I kind of also think the way we are seeing, we can see two examples here. Animal Ranbir Kapoor, who is showing this aggression, and then Gully Boy Salima, who is also showing this aggression. And it cannot be called feminine because she is being violent. But men are so quick to say कि if men have done it, then the film would be bad. If women are showing violence, so if women are showing violence, so if there is feminism, there is equality. That movie wasn't as popular as Animal. That movie was popular, but not because of Sakina. Women were not taking that image. Now we are going to do this violence. If any man cheat on us, we are going to break his head. No, women are not getting inspired. But on the other hand, the aggression that Ranbir Kapoor showed in Animal, that is getting all the praise. Now no man is saying where is equality, where is feminism. Now men are praising Ranbir Kapoor. But when Shabina was doing the same, man are thinking, oh, feminism, oh, how can a woman, that was the
So, whose hypocrisy is it then? Like, is it because you are? I'm a little confused because if Sabrina is not being targeted, but Ranbir Kapoor is targeted, then it shows a different kind of hypocrisy. That no?
No, I think she's saying that Sabrina was targeted because she was showing aggression as a woman, and as a woman you're
Not supposed to. Okay, got it.
But from her point when Ranbir Kapoor, when he's showing aggression, he becomes an idol.
Idol, yeah.
Every cis-white man.
Yeah. And so it's like the treatment, I guess. And so then Vanga is someone who's embracing what we understand about toxic masculinity. And similarly, when and he's like kind of promoting it, encouraging this kind of structure. Similarly, when like the oppressed, the women, the powerless people who, when they mobilize this concept of toxic masculinity as oppressing them, they are also doing something similar, which is that they are conflating aggressiveness with as something which automatically collapses into acts of violence. So I don't know if this point that I'm trying to make, if you are getting it. So I'm saying that like I understand all your objections and I'm sympathetic with it. But I'm just saying let's do a thought exercise. Just like Vanga is showing this toxic masculine man as someone whose aggression from childhood is automatically leading into acts of violence. Similarly, the concept of toxic masculinity that is deployed by feminists and people like us, who are against this kind of toxic violence, is also performing a similar kind of conceptual work, which is that of saying that any kind of aggressive behavior is going to automatically turn into violence. That you can't just have people just feeling aggression or venting aggression in a verbal way. In fact, the whole category of toxic violence or toxic masculinity is very, the way it's supposed to have manifested is through this very popular thing called mansplaining. So it remains confined to the verbal domain. You understand, like it's supposed to be that any man who tries to speak on behalf of a woman, is not letting the others speak because they are so agitated that they want to always have their own point of view. Doesn't have to go, like that itself is an act of violence. So in some ways, like this distinction between a verbal and physical violence is already erased. Do you get what I'm saying? So we're talking about different kinds of violence here. We're talking about the violence of speech. Aggressivity is like how else do you express aggressivity? An aggressivity which is not necessarily an act of abuse or exploitation. How do women express their aggressivity? Like you mentioned, right? Like that women's aggressivity is a different kind of aggressivity. How is it expressed? Through speech? Not through slaps, right? Through speech. And so supposing a man would also use speech, but somehow it becomes a different form of violence. It becomes a kind of violence itself, because there is, and I'm not denying it, I'm just saying that let's just kind of go step by step and just figure it out so that one is not kind of collapsing things which should not be collapsed. Because what is really at stake here is like the very notion of does masculinity have a right to have a separate kind of position, or that it should fold into that it's all toxic and that it should fold into a feminine, or like it should surrender itself. So given the large stakes in this question, like we have to ask these questions. Is there a position of masculinity which is devoid of toxicity? Okay. So I think enough. I've explained my problematic pretty well, and so I'm going to then. I don't know how much time. How much time do I have? Like, so there were some concepts of Lacanian psychoanalysis, but I don't know whether they are so important if the time is. Okay, maybe I'll just go briefly over them. So, yeah. So, like the question that I'm asking is, would the incel figure be an aberration, or is it part of the generalized masculinity? Right? I think by now it's very clear. And can masculinity be decoupled from toxicity? So, one of the things that we see in the film, that film contributes to the kind of everyday Indian vocabulary, is the concept of the alpha male. Do you think this concept was as popular before the film, or
It's very popular for quite a while. In fact, we have Sigma male, and especially it stems from Patrick Bateman, American Psycho. Yeah. So a lot of men they idolize Patrick Bateman, who is actually a psychopath and a killer. But whenever there are any, like if we see in social media, the reels or YouTube shorts, then if a man is acting in a very rude, aggressive manner, then again they're said that okay, they are Sigma, and then we have a clip of Patrick Bateman. So I think
so
it has been there before.
how much has this idea of the psychopath, toxic man, percolated into like the kind of, I mean, I guess these things these are very tricky, like who is the mass audience? Is this necessary, like the light?
It's projecting.
Um, so, but I feel like the movie has given a new spin to it.
Yes.
And so maybe we'll go over what the movie is projecting as the alpha male. And then we'll talk about, because it also harks back to a very critical psychoanalytic concept of the primal father, which Freud coined. And then we talk about, this concept of love as it emerges not between man and woman, but as between mother and child. Like that is the template of love, from which all forms of love that are expressed in some ways. And then the role of the symbolic father, which means not your biological father, but the father who helps you, removes you from, separates you from the fusion with the mother. And then, and the romantic relationship or the idea of the couple is basically an attempt to take this relationship of the mother and child elsewhere, outside the intimacy of the family unit, and outside the incestuous kind of circuit of the family unit to someone else, to someone outside. And so, and finally, so this idea of sexual non-rapport, which means that men and women are, not that men are from Mars or women are from Venus kind of thing, not some kind of essentialization, but that their fantasies, the way in which men and women fantasize is different. And so their approaches to love and sexuality are different. And so when they come together, there is a mismatch and a dissatisfaction and conflict. And so the sexual relationship is, in some ways, like screwed right from the beginning in some ways. And the romantic relationship is not that it's come into crisis now, but that it was always in crisis. So these are some of the concepts that I wanted to go over, but might take some time and might skip it also, so that we can just go into the clips and like looking at the film and then maybe talking about these concepts if, through those clips. Can you have the next slide? Can you play this? Does it sound like? Okay, I'll just tell you what you say. So, for those of you who have not watched the film, Rashmika, the character playing his love interest, is she's about to get engaged, and I mean she is getting engaged, and Ranbir Kapoor sees her and he decides that like she should get married to him and not to the man that she is about to get married to, and so he gives her this entire lecture on what is an alpha male. And so it's like a very biologically determined understanding of what an alpha male is. That in the past, so this is not a historical past, it's a mythological past.
जंगल में घुसकर शिकार कर लेकर आते थे और बाकी मर्द यानी भीतर होते सब में बांटते। औरतें खाना पकाती थी, बच्चों को बाकी सबको खिलाते थे। कम्युनिटीज ऐसे फंक्शन करती थी, पर औरतें सिर्फ खाना नहीं पकाती, वो ये भी डिसाइड करती थी कि शिकारियों में से कौन सा मर्द उनके साथ बच्चे पैदा करे, कौन उनके साथ रहेगा, सोएगा, प्यार करेगा, कौन उनके बच्चों को बाकी शिकारियों से, जंगली जानवरों से प्रोटेक्ट करेगा। ये सब कुछ औरतें डिसाइड करती। ये पापा मम्मी क्लास रीजनल लेजेंड यूनिवर्सिटी का जॉब कुछ नहीं था। अगर तुम होती तो किसे चूज करते? मतलब बच्चों वायलेंस या अल्फा? जब सारी औरतें स्ट्रॉन्ग मर्दों को चूज करने लगी तो इधर बंदे जने सो गए। इच्छा और वासना तो उन बेचारों की भी है। तब पैदा हुई उल्टी। मैं तेरे चंगा मामा नहीं कराऊंगा, आंख के डरे से तैर के जाऊंगा, 7 समुद्र पार करूंगा, ये ले आऊंगा, वो ले आऊंगा, कुछ नहीं करते हो, करते हैं तो बस।
Very violent. But so he's basically saying that that we are genetically programmed, biologically programmed. Men are like this; they're like hunters, gatherers, and they take care. The alpha male is this kind of leader of the pack of the horde, and he spends for the women and the children and the community. And the women are of course designed to produce babies. And so, who will you choose if would you? And there are all these other men, like non-alpha men, who are basically schmucks. Like they are bluffing their way through because they cannot be the alpha male. So they are just making false promises that I will bring you Chandama and this and that. And so. It's interesting, like the fact that she has been selected as like the superior species who's going to choose the alpha male, and this is very similar to something that Freud talked about in his two seminal books. One is Totem and Taboo, and the other is Moses and Monotheism. So in Freud, the category is that of a primal father. Who is the primal father? So, go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is the primal father, who's again like similar to what Wanda is depicting as the alpha male, unlimited in his power, which he uses brutally, and like he's outside the law, and but he lays down law for other people. He can kill, he can rape, he can have all the women to himself, but all the other men, including his sons, have to be restrained. They don't have the freedoms that he has. And the main freedom here is that of sexual freedom over other women, like over all the women in the world. So what they did in this narrative, what the sons, because they were feeling extremely frustrated by what the father was doing, like he had unleashed this reign of total anarchy in some ways, because he was the one who was enjoying all the women, who was enjoying all the riches, and forcing the men to lead this impoverished life. So the sons got together and they decided to kill him. And not only kill him, but partake, like they had a feast and they partook, like it was an act of cannibalism. They consumed his flesh. But after that, they felt very guilty. And so what did they do? Out of guilt, because the whole point of killing the father was that they should have the same freedom that he has. They should also be able to enjoy other women. They should also be able to enjoy the riches, etc. But once they had killed the father, something else happened. Instead of enjoying the same things as the father, they felt very constrained and contrite, and so they Instead, they instituted the law of the father for themselves, which meant that they were now going to be law-abiding citizens. So whatever we know as patriarchy was founded by the sons, patriarchal laws, and in which the whole kind of development of monogamy, heterosexual monogamy was instituted. Like this is how relationship between men and women should ensue. So, but like here you see that there was one, the youngest son, so there was an exception to the rule. So the alpha is the exception to the rule, of course. Like he is outside the law and he can do whatever he wants. And the other sons, like they brought it upon themselves. Even though they killed the father, they wanted to be part of the law. But except the youngest son, which is manifested in various folk literature, who aspires to take the father's position. Aspires to be that exceptional man who can be outside law. And we can see that Banga is playing on that. Ranbir Kapoor, the alpha man, who is exceptional, where the law does not he's not supposed to submit to law itself. Okay. So that was one important concept to understand like where the resonances are coming between the two. And so what is really going on with this Freudian myth of the primal father is that in order to, like what is the law? The law says that if you have to live like a society, of brotherhood, because it's basically these sons were brothers, the eternal contract was signed by them. Like if you have to respect each other's private property, and women were also seen as part of the private property, then you have to give up that desire for instinctual gratification. Like you have to stop being animals. Because what is it? An animal. An animal, how does one distinguish an animal from a human? The animal is a creature of instincts, whereas humans are not instinctual creatures. What does this mean? So, when you see an animal child be born, you see that they don't really need the parents to take care of them. Like very soon, like whether it's a calf or an elephant child or a cat or a kitten, you see that they find their bearings very soon and they start walking and going around the world. So there's a kind of instinct for self-preservation, for survival there. Right, and that is what Banga is channeling in some ways. Whereas with the humans, Lacan would say that the human is born premature, which means that they need, like if they are left alone, the human baby, if they are left alone, then they would die. They need the protection and care of the parents to take care of them. Because a human child cannot do what a kitten or a puppy can do. They would die. So in some ways, because they don't have the instinct for self-preservation. In fact, what then distinguishes the human subject from the animal body is that humans are into self-destruction also. That they are capable of self-destruction, like of risking their own bodily well-being. And we see that enacted in the film.
I think
I had the class information.
So we don't have much time.
No,
So in like we see the Ranbir Kapoor character. Okay, I'm going to try and wrap it up now. So we see in the film, what we see is that the Ranbir Kapoor character is a self-destructive character because he is, throughout the film we see that he is subjecting himself to a lot of violence. Like he's killing other people, but that murderous journey is also opening him to being killed. So he's like on the brink of death itself. Like he gets shot and wounded, and so there is a kind of disregard for the bodily safety in some ways, and at the same time, and also there is a lot of reference to genitalia in the film. There is a reference to the father's penis, his own penis, when he gets injured, his bladder stops functioning, he hit the bladder and using catheters. And then there is a whole I'm not going to show it, a whole sequence which people have said doesn't make any sense. But I feel it makes a lot of sense, where Ranbir Kapoor is complaining to the staff, to the kind of cleaning staff, he's complaining, what have you done to my underwear? He says these are handcrafted, underwear, and each one of them has 1,000 weaves in it, so it's some luxury brand that he's wearing. And he goes on and on, it's a long extended sequence. And he's saying, what have you done? Because you've been using some bad detergent, and because of that, I have rashes now in my nether regions. And so he's taking that class, and so at first glance you won't know why is the sequence there? Why is this long sequence about his underwear there? Because it is pointing attention to the whole phallic region, right? And yet, the phallus is never shown in that sense. I mean, of course, there are censorship laws, so I don't think we can show nudity in that sense. But if we are thinking about the alpha male, okay, now let me, because I'm trying to wrap up, I'll say this slowly. So what does the alpha male stand for? Alpha male stands for kind of exceptional status, someone who's outside law, and someone who doesn't have to abide by the common law, right, and regulations, and so in some ways, someone who rejects castration. Castration here means not the typical Freudian understanding of castration, but castration means that you give up your pleasure, you give up your gratification. And so we clearly see that the way the male protagonist is positioned, he is refusing to give up his enjoyment. I mean, he operates in a completely unfiltered manner, and he can do whatever he wants. He can kill, he can rape, though he doesn't rape, but in some ways he can ride over other people's agency. Even his own father, whom he worshipped so much, he never consults with him. And he said, I have to take 100 decisions, I can't take your permission every time. So in some ways, he is the law. He's the embodiment of the law, and he will do everything for his enjoyment. He will not be censored, right? So on the one hand, the alpha male stands for this, but on the other hand, so the alpha male also stands for omnipotence, all powerful, right? But then why is the alpha male always, his genitals are always expressed, as a region of injury, of wound. They're wounded, they are damaged. That doesn't make sense because, in the iconography of the alpha male, where dictators have, the kind of symbology that we associate with the alpha male and car, for instance, in advertisements. That's or the gun as that extension of the penis. We always see that he is he has this kind of sexual prowess and what that he's a possessor of perfect organ in some ways. But in the film, instead, we see that this is not the case. That even though he's an alpha male and he can do whatever he wants, but the so-called phallic region is extremely vulnerable. He can't even. There are references to the fact that he can't have sex with his wife, that he hasn't had sex with his wife for a very long time. So this is a contradiction, and it's a very kind of natural contradiction because what it shows is that it reveals the myth of the alpha, that there is nobody who's really only good. Everybody is subject to the law of symbolic, which means language. And the moment we enter language, we have created a division between ourselves and our what we want to achieve, our enjoyment. That somehow we have our path to that enjoyment is restricted. Because what does language do? Language, it stands in the place place of the absent other. So in some ways, when the kind of desire that the Ranbir Kapoor character is showing in the film is that of he wants to be the father of the father, because that's what his desire is. Like he is the father that somehow frustrated his wishes as a child, but even then he was telling the father that in the next life I want you to be my son, and you should learn from me. And so in some ways, where is this desire coming from? This kind of desire to be the father of the father. And what does it reflect? What is it really expressive of? So, and this is my argument, that what it's actually expressing is the fact that there's a crisis of masculinity. And the father, who was earlier the guarantor of justice, of fairness, of equality, of law, of things being good, who would protect you from harm and so on. Like, the original masculine kind of goodness, like that I spoke of, that is no longer accessible to us. And that figure is missing in action. And it's absent. And in the absence of such a father figure, like symbolic father figure, we're not talking about the real father or biological father. In the absence of such a figure, it could be law, it could be language, whoever gives authority to somebody, we should have someone to look up to, because if there is no one to look up to, then we are swimming in the deep oceans, with the sharks. And so it's very scary. So that's what this desire to be the father of the father is reflective of, precisely this kind of anxiety, this kind of crisis of masculinity, of the absence of the father, or the father being a dead father. Because the Anil Kapoor character is actually, he's like a cardboard character, and he's not really there. And so, and what we are witnessing now, even though we have such strong men amidst ourselves, like in our social lives, our political lives, and yet what this kind of proliferation of strong men in our midst reveals is that there is no father. And so in some ways to kind of occupy that vacuum, that void, we need this kind of the kind of invention of alpha male, a political alpha male, or an exceptional father. I'll just finish, otherwise I'll lose this train of my thoughts on that. Can you go to the next slide? I just want to see, should I just end here or? Yeah, I'll go over at least still slides. So in some ways, what we're seeing here, he goes to some village in Punjab because he needs to what is interesting happening in the film is that in the film, they're not killing the father. They're actually keeping the father protected. And how does he protect his father from the outsiders is to go to the village in Punjab and revive all his old relations these martial race, because they're a Sikh family apparently, and get the brothers to join as a band, who will pledge fealty or loyalty to this alpha male. And so he said, we brothers will be true to our bond and ride on water with water. So, and can I have the next slide, please? The next one, please. So that is always present, we see Ranbir Kapoor on like hand-to-hand combat, like the alpha male is not someone who needs the gun because he has like the gun himself, but we see that the gun is only present. So it reveals that the alpha male is both alpha in his kind of imaginary subjectivity, but also he is extremely vulnerable. Like that alpha is just a kind of reaction formation to the fact of there not being such a category, there not being found. Okay, next one please. Okay, this is very interesting because his kind of romantic, since the talk is really about the possibility of romantic couple. So in the film, this is the only, there's only I think maybe 10 minutes, there's a song which is devoted to some kind of romance. Where they're having sex on the plane and whatever, and he tells her that, I want to have children. Of course, the alpha male wants to have children. And she says, you'll be a good father, not like your father. And he gets really mad and he says, don't you dare. And he said, you can ask me about anything, but don't go there. And then he says, I will never betray you, which is not true because he does betray her. And the moment he uses language, like I said, that the moment you use language, you are actually revealing yourself as castrated, as not alpha. Because what does it say? It puts him in the same category as the other men that he was talking about. When he was telling her that, this is what an alpha male is, and you want an alpha male, or do you want those other guys who promise all this stuff, right? And she said, I want an alpha male, not the false, men make false promises. And the thing about language is that the moment you open, you are going to give a false promise. When he says that I will never betray you, it means it's sealed that he is going to betray you. And so in that sense, he proves himself to be not an alpha. Then on the next slide, please. I think, truly the last line. So what we see from the film happening is that, there is a kind of return, so there is a kind of lack of absence of romance in the typical way, because we don't see them, like she wants romance maybe. We see her various times complaining that they are not having sex, they're not spending time together, but he's consumed by this kind of drive to avenge his father. And it's not even about his father, it's about his own thing. So it's almost like a self-obsessed, self-erotic, it's an autoerotic kind of thing that he's pursuing. Like almost an incestuous thing. So in that sense, the male sexuality or the incel sexuality that we see is all about returning to himself rather than going out and copulating with another partner from the world, but it's returning to the family, returning to his own body. So it's a very incestuous, autoerotic thing. Something very masturbatory about it. And something and masturbation, as you know, creates huge anxiety socially, right? It's somehow seen as very anti-social. I mean, I'm not talking about the sexual act only, but also when we refer to masturbatory kind of behavior, it refers to people who are self-absorbed, who don't care about other people, they're arrogant, they just lock themselves in their rooms. And so it creates this kind of antisocial kind of personality thing. So in which it again has resonances of itself in that sense. So yes, so what I'm arguing is that if there is a new fantasy of toxic masculinity or a new fantasy of the incel male, then it is all about some kind of tribalism or returning to the fold, like of a notion of society where you are not like, you know, engaging with other people, with the community, but you are in some ways reverting back to yourself, like to kind of individual private space. And like this, or not just the individual private space, or to a clan, to a family, where like there's a kind of glorification of the family unit itself. And the family unit defined exclusively in a mythical patriarchal way, you know, like which follows the father's life. You know, so the cousins, the brothers, the father. And the mother, for instance, is totally insignificant. The mother who is supposed to be the primal relation through which love, the first lessons in love are understood or elaborated is completely silent. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Yeah, please.
The whole theory of the alpha male, I feel, has very flawed, it has been adapted for a study that was done on blues at one point in time in like the 90s or something. And that is since been disproven that something like that doesn't exist in nature. But I feel like it's the image that has been accepted through even other films that are in the same category. As Mami mentioned, there's American Psycho, there's also Taxi Driver. There's also Batman. A lot of times that's used in this film. It's basically, I mean, all of them come down to this whole really self-absorbed main character that we talk about. Like all of them have very just bracketed lives, and that bracket does not extend beyond their idea of the self. Even in American Psycho, there was a scene where the Patrick Bateman is having sex with some prostitutes that he has picked up from the streets, and he's flexing his own muscles in the mirror. So it is still a masturbatory experience because it's still him watching himself in that image. Even in Taxi Driver, where he's supposed to get a call and the camera just pans to a hallway, but there's no one that comes through the hallway. There's an expectation of you as an audience that okay, maybe there's some detention upcoming, someone is going to come meet him when he gets the call, but there's just no one.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's a
tradition,
genre.
Yeah, and like I don't know because the animal character, animal, I feel is actually a lot more satirical than it is given.
I agree.
Credit of. It's the culture of the internet around it has actually formed some sort of a cult around this figure, which is actually insane. It's just hilarious because all of these films, these were made to villainize the character. These were made to satirize this sort of lonely character that comes up and that just doesn't do anything. It's just self-absorbed and it's bad.
Exactly. Yeah, you feel pity for him in fact. It's very pathetic.
Yeah, even in Taxi Driver, in American Psycho, there's just nothing that happens. It's just all boils down to some senseless violence at the end.
Yes.
In Taxi Driver, he goes in and kills so many people. In American Psycho, the last sequence, he also kills a cat and like random people on the street. And there's just a lot of violence.
Yeah.
Also reflects a little bit on the Clockwork Orange. The Clockwork Orange is basically the most graphic of all of them.
Yeah. I agree. I think you're making a very good point because you're saying that the films themselves do not project this silence. They project them as like in a very dark way. And it's the kind of the discourse around it which turns it into some kind of celebration. And so in some ways it's kind of appropriating for that whole purpose of toxic masculinity that I was talking about.
American Psycho is directed by who? And a lot of these people don't even know that.
Yeah.
They just analyze it, oh my god, this is peak male behavior.
Yeah.
This is how men are supposed to be.
Absolutely.
And it's just hilarious sometimes.
I'm so glad you said that.
I want to say something. I don't know if actually this thing exists really, but the kind of behavior that we are actually talking about of men. I mean, in our opinion, we seeing some kind of belief of a safe cage, in our opinion, like a protective shield for them, that they don't actually face the society reality and they can just stay from everything, and it's a safe cage for them. For other people, it would be like, okay, this guy is rude and he doesn't want to talk to us, and he's very unexpressive. But in reality, sometimes it could be that they actually don't want to because they can. Sometimes they don't have the ability to express themselves.
Yeah.
It's also a psychological problem that people need to have. A safe cage for them is like moving in a band, in 4 different groups, but actually doesn't motivate them. They just want to be with something, with someone,
Yeah.
when they actually cannot be. And the kind of film that we are actually talking about, when in my opinion, those people are not actually young. Those who are actually creating those movies. They know the kind of psychological science that they have.
Yes.
The kind of movie that they will create, which people will see. So they only create something that people will see.
Exactly.
And that's not this one. If something like we can say a value like honesty, justice, and these kind of things are very prominent in a particular country or a particular cinematical watches. So they are going to create that kind of films only.
Yeah.
I mean, just take the examples of they create such kind of movies which shows their culture because they know that their culture is very, very prominent in their region. They want to see that thing only, not the other thing. So that is the point. If we actually change our kind of a mindset and our values, the kind of film they are going to create, they'll be just like what we want to see.
And like, what about Rocky or Rani to Break Hammer? So what?
I actually don't watch Bollywood movies, so
Okay.
I think I have 2 points. Number one, I think counter the point that you said. There have also been films like Fate in Bollywood or Family in Hollywood. So I think it's also about the kind of nationalization that exists, and that's coming to my second point. There's also kind of nationalization that has to be taken place before making even style to that matter.
Yeah.
If there's a Sandeep Reddy who's making a similar film called Arjun Reddy, in which he's again satirizing that kind of violence. In interviews with my analyzing that kind of violence. In conversations, in articles, there are complete reports of all of these things. What online film do we see that film in? We cannot see that as a film. And if that film, we cannot see that in a satirical light. If the audience itself is getting, pleasure and influence by that balance. So I mean, it's not about. I mean, it's a dialectical relationship between the audience and the maker. I mean, the maker might invent something, but the way that audience receives it also determines the social pattern of that.
Just to, like what you said, that he is not intending satire, I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that the with themselves do not offer any satire.
Yeah.
So we cannot like absorb him, but at the same time, we have to listen to the movie, and the movie, it is, I agree with you, like there is a kind of satire, like he does not come across as a, like he comes across as a sympathetic character only so far as he's weak and impotent. Like you think, oh God, like.
Yeah, it's not, I'm not going to try to portray that and to satire satirical at all. What I want to say is the Harsha point is also very prominent, and that brings in the point of sensationalization.
Yeah.
That is very rampant in making movies successful.
Yeah.
Why are Sanjay Leela Bhansali's movies successful? They are gorgeous, no doubt about it. But they are also extremely, divisive in sort of, they are sensationalized. When what was the movie that that's what When Padmavat came out, there was this whole controversy that about India's depiction of this princess and whatever. The thing is, there are a lot of people that say it was fabricated, that it was created by the movie's PR team to promote the movie.
Yeah.
And like, as much as we can say, oh my god, manga is just ignorant, like he doesn't understand the implication of the thing words that he's saying. I feel like they are also part of a deliberate PR ploy to promote the film, to make more people watch it, even if they hate it, so that more tickets get sold.
Yeah, like what you said, there's a dialectical relationship, like one can't ignore any aspect. You wanted to ask.
Yeah. I don't think we should even, I mean, term itself, it means equality and celebrate, right?
Yeah.
And it popular through years, particularly in America.
Yeah.
So what Sarma is talking about, that kind of consciousness of the director. So there is a scene in the film where he brings a gun to the school, right?
Yeah.
Which is something that you also, which is also something how the term actually got popularized in America.
Exactly. The gun violence. Yeah.
So I mean, I think there is a sense that manga also has, I mean, I'm not to say that, in fact, American Psycho particularly, since you mentioned it, is a film which plays on this. But I think the characters themselves, there is a kind of self-victimization, as you also mentioned in one of the slides, that he's portraying himself as the alpha male, but he's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? Where he's not, he's victimizing himself, and that sexual frustration is coming out in a lot of other ways also.
Yeah.
So for that, when this happened in America, so there was an interview with Vice where the journalist goes out to talk to somebody who claims to be an incel, and they have a conversation with him, and then the person is saying that I can't get women, I can't, but he's talking in very coherent language, he's very articulate. And when the video gets uploaded on YouTube, a lot of women on the comment section are saying, he's a good-looking guy, he also speaks well. I don't see what the problem is. There is a kind of, it's also something to imagine, that he's imagining in his own mind, that there is a problem with me. Which then, translates into a lot of, as you also mentioned, a lot of violence then.
Yeah.
So I think Wanda also is aware of it to a certain extent. Maybe that's why also the insertion of that particular scene.
Which nobody will be able to kind of justify.
Right.
Whether it's also serving meals that we still sort of regulated by, looking at the man, and whether he's dark, or whether it's stereotyped, or whether there is, any kind of clearing or not. So there is a kind of an accepting of women that's still happening. So we're still, any which way we're still looking at whether it's anxiety, whether it's a crisis of masculinity, whether it's an alpha male, or whether it's a castrated male. So, what is happening there outside of that?
In the cinematic space or? Yeah. I mean, a very good question. Because, it boils down to a big question, which is why for so many years there have been so many waves of feminism. Women have protested. More and more women have entered the public sphere and are occupying so-called agency roles, but yet patriarchy continues to persist. What is the reason for that? Why has, we can only talk about, it's not so bad, maybe it was worse, but actually in some ways it's worse. And so, when we put it in those terms, it's not my answer, but based on, say, Daniel Gold's or other psychoanalytical people that I've been quoting, they would say that there is something about patriarchy that is extremely rewarding psychologically. Why it cannot be just thrown aside? Because obviously it doesn't make sense. And yet, there must be something about it that is rewarding to both men and women. And it's like, it protects against the fear of loneliness. Because even in this film, like Rashmika, the female protagonist, is a very strong character actually. Like even though she says, yeah, I live with an alpha male and she's playing the role of the dutiful wife, but in the end, she can't tolerate him and she decides to leave him. So in that sense, like she chooses the only option that is left for women is to be single, to be alone, like to in some ways embrace the loneliness outside the. So when I said sexual non-rapport, like of course the man is totally into himself, self-indulged. But even the woman, like what is she expecting from the man? She is expecting some kind of romantic engagement, like what romance novels are based on, like some kind of reciprocity. And she doesn't get it, obviously. Not just vis-a-vis such a character, but in patriarchy itself, like women have been deprived of that kind, what they are looking for. That relationship or that long-lasting love. And so, in some ways, and yet they remain prefer to stay within those relationships. And that is what patriarchy. The reason why they do is because even if it's an alienating relationship, even if it's something which gives them suffering and loss, there is something satisfying. At least they are within that they belong somewhere. And like they can experience that loss. Whereas if you're completely on your own, and that's how feminine desire is separate from the male desire. Male desire is always on his own, even when he is in so-called relationship. Whereas feminine desire is that there is a longing for some kind of relationship, of being able to endure loss, of alienation, but through that, some kind of desire. Because you can feel desire only when you have loss. And so in that way, I mean, this is a very kind of complicated point, but and that's possibly the reason why women have continued to, despite knowing better, they have continued to remain within patriarchal structures. Not that it's only their contribution, it's not as women are the ones who are maintaining the institution of patriarchy, but that is a solid reason why the loneliness is not fun. Freedom is actually touted to be fun, but it's not fun. And if you think of it psychoanalytically, it's because our first relationship is with our mothers, and it's a relationship of fusion, being bonded, bounded to a body. And so being cut loose is not a nice sensation. It's not a pleasant sensation. Where you're, yeah.
Talking about creating communities.
Exactly.
That's more discursive, as against the masculinist ideal, which is more single in that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, self-reflective.
Yeah, but the community invariably falls into some kind of patriarchal structure. So that's the kind of difficulty of this kind of question.
And I think they sort of noticed in other markets. There's a trope of, so female character is almost getting married and then she's being swept away by the male character. Because then the music is there, this one is there. But the whole, again, the point you highlighted about the empty promises and everything.
Yeah.
And also, the fact that most of these films, they don't show a relationship, they just show conflict.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're not sentimentalizing.
Yeah. There's no sort of, just wanting to offer a kinship in any way, romantic, non-romantic, whatever. It's just conflict. There is fight.
The only romance is with the father. The absent father. Yeah. Any other comments? It doesn't have to be about my talk, anything that you were thinking about.
I was kind of, seeing both that cannot be called a feminine rage, even though, we are saying the men are frustrated. That's why they are behaving in this way.
Yeah.
In that, in the boy, women, Satina is also frustrated. She wants the kind of freedom. She says to her, mother, I want to go to party, I want to, live my own life, I want to do all these things. And that's why she will become violent through that rage. That aggression, she shows that aggression. But then I was seeing the way you said the women, the women long for that partnership.
Yeah.
So even if it happens, even after the fight and all, and he cheats on her, in the end, Shafina goes back to even after getting pregnant, she goes back to the regularity since she goes back to him.
Yeah.
And even the same happened in Animal as well. And because partnership, they lost the partnership, they ended relation. Violence, it's not the Ranveer Singh is not showing violence, not in that sense, but it's like emotional violence. He's like cheating on her, he's not telling her, he's playing with her emotion in the movie.
Yeah.
But still, she's going back, she longs for that. What real she is like, I want freedom. I want to party. But I don't know where this freedom, the idea of freedom, the idea of party goes out and she comes again into that relationship.
Yeah.
That wasn't her idea of freedom.
Very. Yeah. I guess. Very good.
So, adding to your point, any kind of extremism when it comes to emotional behaviors within Bollywood films is very rare for me. So it has to be a build-up, right? Rashmika is watching him see who's saying here, there, the scene where there's a Bhabhi number 2. So there's a build-up, and then she confronts him, and But with Safina, you saw action like quick, and that's why you can give it a feminist like calling it a feminine rage. That's not right. But you see extremism in her behavior. The rage is like a man's, it's uncalled for absolutely. It is uncalled for, but it is so in your face. Then you call it, feminist rage.
But even then, women are very good to, women are very quick to criticize the behavior. If they show the behavior is kind of violent and abusive, because when that movie Very Ball came out, a lot of women and a lot of feminists critique that movie, and even women admitted themselves, this is the wrong behavior, women should not do this. Women look upon their mistake and they like and they recognize abuse. Men do not. Men celebrate abuse.
Because at the end of the day, if you want to live in a patriarchal system that is India, that is our current society, somewhere you have to conform. And in the end, when Safina goes back to Very Boy, that is her redressal of, sorry, there are aggression kind of first of movie, but look, I'm again fitting into that patriarchal role. I'm again going back to that part.
Thank you for sitting through a very long
I would like to thank Jan for coming here and talking about the discussion. And thank you to the audience for staying here with us and bringing out your opinions and points. And thank you to our professors. And thank you, sir, for helping us with the technical issues like especially. Thank you so much, and I hope all of you had a wonderful discussion and exciting. Yes, can we have a